And I want to see them do it. I want to see the tandem in the playoffs. I do. You've got, as you said, you've gone this whole way. Again, I get it. If someone comes along and blows your socks off with a deal for Ullmark, then we can talk. But if it's just a regular ass trade that is not something that drastically improves your chances both now and in the future, I'm not for that. And welcome into Poke the Bear, episode 207, powered by Prize Picks. I'm Evan Marinofsky. That's Conor Ryan. Connor, what is up?
Evan, I'm doing well. How you doing?
Doing great. Again, getting a little bit healthier every day. I don't know about you, but last night, the minute that Bruins game ended, laptop shut, right to bed. Had to do it to him. How about you? How are you feeling?
I'm feeling a little bit better. Again, much like you, crashed as soon as that Bruins game ended.
As soon as the Bruins crashed.
Yeah. Kind of regretted not going to bed earlier, considering I think we've mentioned this before, but the Bruins are kind of like a Fast and Furious movie. You kind of know how it's going to end. And as soon as they were nursing that 2-1 lead going into the third period, what happened, Evan? What happened?
Oh, what happened? You knew it was coming. The minute they entered that second intermission with a 2-1 lead, it's like, oh, well, that's gone. I was surprised it happened as quick as it did. And, it's interesting. So the Bruins obviously lose to Seattle and the road trip 3-2 with a shootout loss. And that the first 6 minutes of that third period, the Bruins were just on the ropes, on their heels. And this has been a recurring theme. And you tweeted it out about how you can't win games like this. If you want to pack it in the final couple minutes because a team is just, coming at you in waves and it's game 6 of the playoffs, then by all means. But when you're doing this kind of defense and you're playing this way now at the beginning of a third period on the road, I just don't know how that's a recipe for success. They do it again on Monday night. They lose. They go down in that period, even though they scored that geeky goal probably should have counted, I thought. But again, that you deserve to have that stuff happen to you when you play like that. And this has been a recurring theme.
Yeah, exactly. It's not like this has been like a couple of fluky goals here and there, bad bounce, what have you. Like when you're 25, 1-8, when you've lost 9 games after leading after 2 periods, that's a trend. That is a mentality. That is, and again, it's the same thing. Like it hasn't been one overarching flaw, but it's the same 3 or 4 things we see time and time again. Like inability to get the puck out of your own end. Like you saw even in this, you knew right as the first few minutes of that third period where the Bruins could not get the puck out, and the Kraken seemed like they could do whatever they wanted in the Bruins end. We're like, all right, we know what's going to happen here. So, whether it's that, whether it's, passes going out into no man's land, which we've seen countless times, bad penalties, even we said it earlier, but timely saves, right? Like there's been a couple of these games where you haven't gotten the saves from Swayman. And then you look at this game with Ullmark where dude launches a puck right into Jordan Eberle and leads to the easiest goal of his life. Even tying goal from Vince Dunn, probably wanted that one back if you're Linus Ullmark.
Yeah, just missed it with his glove.
It's just one of those things where it seems like everything's kind of going wrong for this team, but we've seen this script play out before. It's one thing if it's, there's one thing you can correct if the power play is not operating at a high level and you're not generating enough breathing room to help get you through these kind of tough third periods. Yeah, that's something that you can kind of shore up if it's one thing to focus on. But what happens when it's 5 or 6 things that keep on sprouting up? It's like the fucking Hydra. It's like you cut off one, you deal with one, and 2 more issues sprout up there. And it's an unsustainable way of going through a season. And again, we mentioned this on our last podcast, right, Evan? It's one thing if it happens now in the dog days of February and it's kind of a grind anyway, what have you. But is anything you've seen from this team, the way they've operated, where they've handled themselves under pressure, that gives you reason to think this isn't going to happen again in April? when the games actually matter.
No, and again, I think even you look at like that game against the Kraken on Monday night, and you've got, mental mistake. Like, never mind the bad passes, never mind, different little things that they came up. Just the mental mistakes. I mean, you have the too many men on the ice, which again, mental mistake. You have Morgan Geekie tripping up, I forget who it was, in the neutral zone. It's like, that is like a penalty you take in NHL 24. Like, why are you leaving your feet to dive and try to, like, I'm all for high compete, but stay on your feet, like, keep skating. And, like, I know 3-on-3 overtime doesn't matter come the postseason. I do think their struggles at 3-on-3 overtime are indicative of something bigger, though. And it's that this roster, there are problems with this roster. There's just not that pop. And I know that, again, 3-on-3 overtime, as I said, it's not going to be in the playoffs, thankfully. But even again, and it's been multiple overtimes in a row, and even though they won it in Edmonton a few nights ago, you still have, you're getting dominated in OT because other teams have more speed, they have more skill. And then once your guys pick up the puck, it's just north-south, or it's, nothing happens. They're too tired. They throw it back. Again, it just kind of hits back at there's no pop on this roster. And outside of like Pastrnak, Marchand, McAvoy, and those guys have had to overcompensate. And that's why you've seen it. Like, I didn't think Marchand played a particularly good game against the Seattle Kraken. There are nights when Pasternak's not on his game, and it's because they're overcompensating because there just isn't a ton around them. And, like, this does kind of fly in the face of what we were saying prior to the All-Star break, where they looked really good, and we were like, hey, this is a team that if they get in could make some serious noise. And you look at scoring goals below the goal line, or fighting for pucks below the goal line and getting pucks to the front of the net and all that stuff. There just isn't that right now. And they're inconsistent. And it's sort of like the Bruins are Jake DeBrusk right now, where it's just like inconsistent, could be better. But I keep going back to the roster. Like, you mentioned like 5 or 6 different things, right? Keep popping up with this team: blowing leads, bad passes, mental mistakes, this and that. I've said it before, I'll say it again. I don't know how you're fixing that in the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, no. And it's something too, where you just look at the state of this roster. You only have, again, 3 or 4 horses you can turn to night in and night out that you know what you're expecting of them. And it's like, even look at like an area of the game that maybe is underrated until probably this year. It's like D-zone draws, and you're having guys routinely lose them. Saka loses 2, and like bang, bang, the puck goes into the back of the net. It's kind of ironic, right? Like, the Bruins move on, or they don't have Bergeron and Krejci this year. And like, the production has more or less been there, like the baseline stats. But the face-off has been what's killing them in terms of those critical situations, especially late in games. And that's the state of the roster. And like, I think Coyle's overall been solid there, but when like Zaka's not holding his own, Geekie, Frederick, and then you have like the fourth line where, again, Boquist has been pretty solid offensively, but he's not like what Johnny Beecher's been. It's just, you're not getting enough out of this roster in terms of maybe the finer details. Yes, you're generating some offense, right? Like, Coyle's been good. Saka's on pace for a 45-point season. Frederick stepped up. But like, as you said, like, this team is kind of like the Jake DeBrusk, that when guys are going, hell, there's a whole lot to like about them. When their goaltending's great, defense is locked in, you're getting secondary contributions from a guy like DeBrusk or Frederick, all is great. But like, you're not getting that enough that you can, one, like, expect that to consistently continue. And like, you get into the playoffs, I was on a podcast with Joe Haggerty talking about this. It's not out of the realm of possibility to see in the playoffs a goalie get hot, DeBrusk goes on a heater, Pastrnak has a takeover. Like, you can see how they could easily win a round or two, but you can just as easily see these guys putting up zeros and not finding their game, and all of a sudden you're out in 5-6 games. Like, there's so much variance with this team. It's just so hard to gauge where exactly they are right now.
And I think that's why this happening now is obviously at a bad point, because you get the trade deadline in less than 2 weeks. They've got to make some tough decisions on this roster because, as you said, it would not shock me. I said this on Bruins Beat on Monday. It would not shock me if this team found a way to go through the playoffs and they end up in like the cup. But it also wouldn't shock me at all if they're out in the first round like that, because just the roster, you have a lot of guys on there who are a bit inconsistent. Like right now, the fourth line seems to be playing pretty well with Brazeau and Richard and Boquist. And you even had Richard starting up in the top 6, start the game, which is quite the interesting move. But you look at like a lot of other guys on the, Geeky, Frederick, Heinen, DeBrusk, Van Riemsdyk, they're reliable, but I don't know if you can always look to them as steady key contributors. And there are going to be some games you don't notice those guys because that's their game. And, you even look at Monday night, right? Pastrnak basically scores a hat trick. I mean, the shot, the third one went off coil. They threw hats on the ice. I'll give it to Pastrnak for the sake of the argument.
Right? Yeah.
We count the hat trick. And they lost. Like that, I think, is the worst case scenario where you get into the playoffs and Pastrnak is kicking ass and the rest of the team just ain't producing. And, DeBrusk had a chance to win it in overtime. That was stopped. And they're just guys you don't notice a heck of a lot. Because again, like on paper, I don't hate Heinen, Geeky, Frederick as a third line. I think that's actually pretty solid. I'm okay with that. And the fourth lines look good lately, but it just, the consistency's not there. And these things keep popping up, not to mention the D zone, and you're not getting the timely saves right now. There's a lot of things that are not going their way. But first, before we continue the conversation, a quick word from our new friends, Connor, our new friends at Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the best way to get action on sports in more than 30 states across the country, including California, Texas, and Georgia. Want to play alongside some of Prize Picks' favorite players like Meek Mill and Sugar Sean O'Malley? You can now find community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries from some of the biggest names in the Prize Picks community every week. And Prize Picks offers weekly promotions that can lead to big payouts like Taco Tuesday. Each Tuesday, Prize Picks discounts select player projections up to 25% to provide even more value. As the Bruins march towards the postseason, it's the perfect time to make your Bruins picks. Are you feeling David Pastrnak shooting the puck a lot coming up? Brad Marchand scoring a lot of goals? Use your knowledge. Download the app today and use code CLNS for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, download the app today and use code CLNS for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. That's electric.
That is sick. Well done, Evan.
Pure electricity. Not even the ad read, but so much the music behind it. It's like, brum, 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 brum. I mean, it's
great.
It's into it,
Shout out Prize Picks.
I'm vibing. Yeah. Shout out Prize Picks for sure. So we've talked a lot about the roster, and I mean, it continued. Like, we make fun of it. Like before the Bruins Kraken game started, I was on playing NHL with some of my buddies, and we were joking like how we went to overtime. Like, we'll be like the Bruins. We'll just lose in overtime. No big deal. We tied the game late. We'll just lose in overtime. And that's what's continued to happen. Like, it is wild that it has been this way for like over a week now. And they've just struggled. And it hits at this. And we touched on this a teeny bit on Bruins Beat. I want to dive into it a little bit more. Does this team need a hockey trade to shake things up?
I mean, you look at just the way things are going right now, there's probably some validity to it. And again, like you weigh that, like, are you making a trade just for the sake of, making a trade, but the value's not there? Like we touched on this with Bruins Beat, right? Like, let's say you want to trade a guy like DeBrusk, uproot a top 6 guy who's been here for a while. Yeah, that is a way to kind of shake the room a little bit, but what are you getting back, right? Are you trading him for the sake of doing it? And again, like, you'll get something. Maybe you're looking more as a forward-thinking move and you're getting a first-round pick. That's useful, but like, how are you replacing him in the lineup? Are you replacing him with a guy that's more of a like third-line winger, right? Like, let's say, for example, if you traded DeBrusk for someone that's like a Marcus Johansson back in like 2019, where it's like could be top 6 maybe, but probably more of a third line kind of guy.
A Zaka for Holla trade.
Yeah. Like, I mean,
you're on the other side of that.
Right. So it is something where maybe you do have to consider in terms of just the way things are going right now. There's no holiday break coming up. If anything, the schedule is going to get even more hectic here, right? Where it feels like once the calendar flips to March and it feels like you've got a game every other day. It feels like there's like 3 back-to-backs coming up pretty soon. It's just the way the schedule is, which again makes no sense before these guys get pulverized in the postseason. But there's really no break coming up here. That whether it's a guy like DeBrusque, whether it's just moving a D-man like Grizzly or Forbert, which again is easier said than done. Like even like we'll talk about in a little bit, but like moving Ullmark, which is a seismic shakeup, right? Like there's got to be, I feel like, something done here. I feel like maybe this team has to view what they have and maybe it's best standing pat, but what else is going to be there in terms of shaking this team out of this kind of malaise they're in? Because again, it's not just one thing that's leading to their struggles right now. It's like continuing to put take your foot off the gas pedal in the third period. It's like miscues, like too many men on the ice, which we've seen way too many. How many times have we seen a too many men penalty called against the Bruins this year? It's
a lot.
Like,
way too many.
Like it does feel like this team needs kind of a reset, and one way to do it is augmenting the NHL roster. Just depends on what the return is going to be. I'm all for making a hockey trade, but you better get something in return, especially if it's a guy like DeBrusque or Ullmark if they get that extreme with it.
And even like one name I mentioned on Bruins Beat was James Van Riemsdyk. Is that a guy who's on an expiring contract? He's relatively cheap, a veteran guy that a team might overpay for. Is that someone that you mull trading? But again, I go back to like, he's the kind of guy I want in the postseason. Like I want that kind of player on my roster come the playoffs. And, I would assume he could maybe get more than a Jake DeBrusque. Just, no insider information there. Just kind of looking at the whole situation. Consistent veteran, know what you're going to get. A good supplemental piece to any middle six of a cup contender. But like, what are you getting in return? Are you trading him for picks? Are you trading him for a big defenseman? Like, what are you exactly going for there? And the other thing is like, people harp on Forbert a lot or Grizzly, or different, they harp on different guys. To trade though, if you just simply trade those players, first of all, you're not going to get a ton for them because they haven't been playing great. And both of those guys also have injury issues. But the other thing is the issues run deeper than them. Yes, they have made mistakes. I agree. Forbert has looked brutal since he came back. Grizzly has not been himself this year. I agree. But you're not fixed if those guys are just off the roster. These are bigger problems than just like, oh man, every time he's on the ice. Like this is deep. This runs deep, and it's kind of gone all over the lineup. So I don't think just trading one guy, but I agree with your sentiment of maybe you trade one guy, shakes things up enough, we'll shake it up, and suddenly it changes things a little bit. I want to get more into this in a second because you mentioned Ullmark, and that's a big one. First, though, quick word from another of our sponsors.
Get started on your New Year's resolutions with Factor, so you're ready for the new year. Factor's ready-to-eat meal delivery takes the stress out of meal planning and sets you up for success in the new year. Skip the grocery stores, prep work, and cooking fatigue. Instead, get chef-crafted, dietitian-approved meals delivered right to your door. With over 35 meals to choose from each week, including options like keto, calorie smart, vegan and veggie, and more, plus over 55 weekly add-ons, you'll have a ton of nutritious and flavorful options to kickstart your resolutions. No more wasting time in the kitchen. Not only does Factor offer fast, simple solutions when I'm too busy to cook, they also help me stay on top of my goals. With offerings like Protein Plus and Keto, I can stay on track. This is definitely going to come in handy for my New Year's goals. So head to factormeals.com/poke50 and use code POKE50 to get 50% off. That's code POKE50. Factor Meals, your go-to ready-to-eat meal delivery service. And now, let's get back to the show.
Connor, before we came on, I had the vegan mushroom marsala with risotto and green beans from Factor. It was actually really good, I gotta say. Definitely good. I like meat, but honestly, I didn't really notice the lack of it. I felt very healthy eating it. That was the good thing. Like, I was like, I didn't have an ice cream sandwich after it or anything. Did not do that. Did not have a Trader Joe's
negate that or anything like that. Well, it's one of those things where I feel like anytime you have something that is like vegan or like an Impossible Burger, you always feel just a little bit better about yourself, right? Like a little bit of a mental boost, I would say.
Well, it's like when you go to the gym and then like you're like, oh, I could have Chipotle on the way home. It kind of, evens itself out. Chipotle is a little healthy. I'll do it. It's
You
that,
say
it's
you
that kind
say
of
you get the salad instead of the rice, but then you douse it in fucking queso, and it just means nothing at all.
and then it's just a little bit less healthy. So, but you mentioned trading Linus Ullmark, and this has come up more and more. We've debated the goalie tandem all year. We've debated this a lot, but it is clear the Bruins are not in the most optimal space. You wrote a story either Monday or Sunday on the pros and cons of dealing Linus Ullmark. Where are you at with that?
I mean, I think I'm still leaning towards keeping Allmark just because I feel like after wasting last season on multiple regards, but also the fact that you never even saw through the goalie rotation in the playoffs. If there's a year to at least say fucking and try it, it's got to be this year, right? Like if you go through, you've relied on these two goalies for years now, and the results have been there. If you get through this entire run, and it could be coming to an end as soon as this offseason based on whatever Swayman gets for the new contract, you might have to move Ullmark then, or move Swayman. Like we'll see like what happens, but sooner or later there has to be some resolution made there. But you go through this entire stretch where you have these two number one goalies, and you don't even attempt to try what you've done for 82 games in the playoffs. Like, what was this? What was this for? And so, like, I understand like the, weighing the pros and cons. Like, yes, maybe you're just ripping off the Band-Aid to a situation you have to deal with anyway in July, right? When Swayman's due a new contract, and I'm not sure the Bruins want to operate moving forward with, 11 to $12 million allocated to two goalies. Like that might not just be feasible right now based on where else they're going to have to spend moving forward. But I just think you look at the state of this team. And yes, even if you maybe get a first round pick or an appealing asset back, if you just go through this entire run without both those guys in place, and again, it's also putting a whole lot of pressure on Jeremy Swayman this year. Like,
Yeah.
as much as I think people want to crown him as the franchise goalie, I think we need to see a little bit more from him, right? Like, whether, especially in the playoffs, like, yes, he was put in a really bad spot, I think, last year, like thrown into the series in Game 7. Again, the way they handled that was a complete shit show last year. Like, it never should have been Ullmark for 6 straight games. Bad spot for Swayman, but Swayman's still a guy that, has a 903, I think, career postseason save percentage. Hasn't looked good in back-to-back games so far this year. Like, I'd rather operate with the, it's almost like I'd rather know what exactly you have. If this team gets bounced in the first round in the goalie rotation, you stick with it, and both guys are off their game, can't get into a groove, I'd rather you go down with the ship with the plan
Yes.
you've mapped out than deviate from it again and just never have that clarity. Again, is it the most conventional way of setting up a goalie rotation? Of course not. It's pretty out there, but like when you have two number one goalies, might as well give it a go and see what you have. And if it doesn't work out, now you know. It's almost like we mentioned this before, but like the Celtics last year, like going down with the ship of like Joe Mazzulla ball of like just shooting threes, and it didn't work out. Now, are they going to change their strategy this year? Probably not under Mazzulla, but the Celtics, the Bruins had this strategy for years now that they deviate from in the playoffs. Let's see what it gives you and then go from there. If it doesn't work out, you hit this offseason, you pay Swayman, you see what you do next with Ullmark. But barring you getting a couple of really high-end draft picks or a really solid return, I just can't see it being something the Bruins drastically uproot such a key foundation of their team at this point in the season.
I completely agree. I haven't felt myself moving off my take of weight on trading Ullmark. I think I've said it a lot. Like, he's not an expiring contract. You can still deal him in the summer, in the off season. Let Swayman kind of ease into being the starter. I don't want to sound like I'm soft or anything, but like, don't just make him the number one guy in early March when he was figuring on being a 1A, 1B situation the whole year. And I want to see them do it. I want to see the tandem in the playoffs. I do. You've gone, as you said, you've gone this whole way. Again, I get it. If someone comes along and blows your socks off with a deal for Ullmark, then we can talk. But if it's just a regular ass trade, that is not something that drastically improves your chances both now and in the future, I'm not for that. Stick with what you've got. It's your strength. I know they're not playing great right now. Neither guy has looked amazing, especially since the All-Star break. They can come out of it, and B, chance-wise, at least one of them will come out of it. So you'll have a guy that should be on come the playoffs, at least one. I want to see them go between it. You've gone all this way. You didn't do it last year. Stick with it. It's a strength. I know a lot of people say, well, one's on the bench. It's good to have the guy there. It is because, okay, because I see a lot of the YouTube comments who want to shake things up, and I get it, or don't want the Bruins to do a lot, but they want them to trade guys off the roster, and I get it. We've touched on DeBrusk and Van Riemsdyk and all that, but Ullmark, right? What's the deal there? Are you gonna trade Ullmark to a team for what? Like a first and a top prospect or something, and then flip one of those to another team for, is that even gonna be enough to get someone who's going to make an impact on your roster? Is that worth it? Is that worth completely shaking up your team? Like, I'm more for what you said earlier, trading like a DeBrusk or trading, someone on the roster, just switching something up. And it hits at this. This has been in my mind as we've been talking, because I think the Bruins should ride things out, give or take one small trade here or there, kind of what we've discussed for the past couple of weeks. I want to see this roster just go, and whatever happens, happens. Do you know what would shake things up? And they're not going to do it, and I don't think you need to do it. But a change at coach would shake things up. Like, what you ideally want from this roster right now is like a coaching change. Remember in 2017 when they let Claude go and they brought in Cassidy? They flew the rest of the season. Because when the coach gets fired, it lights a fire under the asses of the players, and they go. Now, I don't think Montgomery's done nearly enough to get fired. I don't think, I'm not for firing Jim Montgomery, but ideally what you want is the effect of a firing. That is sort of what you need right now, because they're in a funk. So, again, I don't think Montgomery's close to being fired. Now, if they're out in the first round again this year, and they jumble up the goalies and it doesn't work, next year he will be on a hot seat. But again, I'm not advocating for Montgomery to be fired now, but you need the effect of that right now, I think.
Yeah, and I think right now the most realistic way of doing it is probably just shaking up the roster. And again, it just comes down to what the price is going to be. Because again, like, I'm almost now leaning towards more of what you said, Evan, where it's like maybe just ride this out, don't relinquish draft capital, keep Lori and Patra, and go into this offseason with a lot more cap space. We can fully reset, but again, that might be hard to stomach when the East is open and what have you. But again, I'm not focusing really on the rest of the league right now. I think if you're a Bruins fan, just focus in on this current team, what you have here, and roll the dice, right? Because again, as we said earlier on in this podcast, this team could get hot and the goalies could work and Pasta could take over and Frederick could chip in and what have you. You could easily map out a path moving forward, especially if, like, hell, maybe they draw Toronto in the first round, a team that you could, is not really known for being a physical opponent, and the path opens up, kind of like in 2019, right? Like, you expected to go through like Washington and Pittsburgh and Tampa Bay, and the path. And not to say that like Toronto wasn't good, that Columbus team was like super slept on, but like things
Yes,
open themselves up as the season goes on.
Young Carolina team.
That could easily happen for any team. Hell, it's the playoffs. That's why we love/hate it, especially when the Bruins done playing in mid-April. But it's again one of those things. It's just so tough to gauge it that maybe the best path moving forward is to really just let it ride out this year. See what you got. Again, it's kind of was already viewed as a bridge year. You almost wonder if like that strong start kind of really changed the expectations for this team as a whole, where I think people...
it definitely did.
Where I think people thought going into the year, like, they'd be competitive. I don't think people thought they were going to, like, miss the playoffs, but we got Patra, we got Lori's knocking on the door. We're going to be, be a fun season, a bit of a transition year. Then they, plant themselves at the top of the East, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, this team could actually do something. Now you're in a spot where, again, you're going back to equilibrium, but maybe Bruins fans don't want to hear that, but this is a team that is still in the middle of kind of a bridge here that maybe just see where the chips kind of fall once you get to April.
The Bruins always like to make it as heartbreaking as possible for their fans.
Yes.
I will say, because I'm in favor. I'm team ride it out. If you want to make a shake-up hockey trade, I'm open to it. Whereas I'm not really open to trading Ullmark. But I think the right move is you ride it out, and it kind of goes back to like we saw with the Red Sox. I think it was last deadline, did nothing, and that's when they tanked, right? Like I do think you should make a move or two that does help the roster. It's, where like depth pieces come in. And again, if it takes too much, then you don't do it. But if you can get a Duhaime or someone like that at a low cost, I'm for it. It supplements the roster, give a little boost to the locker room. All for that. I think the tough part about fully riding things out and not doing anything is DeBrusk and JVR could walk in the offseason for nothing. And they're both fairly valuable commodities. Like, that's where it's tough. Like, I agree with you. I want to see this roster go to the playoffs the way it is, and I want to see what happens. The unfortunate part of that is you could get assets for DeBrusk and JVR. Like, if they're out in the first round, let's say, are we going to sit here in late April and be like, man, they should have dealt DeBrusk. Man, they should have dealt JVR. Like, and that's sort of the gamble you take. And I'm okay with them taking that gamble. I'm just saying long term, it would stink if that was the case. And those guys left and you didn't get anything for them. But again, if they make a run and they go to the second, third Stanley Cup round, then it's different. And I don't think that that's out of the possibility. I think, obviously I see the YouTube comments. Sometimes I dive in there. It's like sifting through, but there's a lot of negativity towards the Bruins. I get it. A lot of people don't think this team is good enough. I think you and I kind of waver on that a lot, but we're also realistic, and the roster's not terrible. It's just not that great. It's just doesn't pop. It's not like last year where, anybody in the top top four lines could roll out in overtime. Taylor Hall's a third liner. You don't have that this year. I think it's catching up to them. And you hit it where they're kind of going, water always finds its level, and they're kind of finding their level right now. And maybe they're not first in the Atlantic because they're not on paper. I wouldn't take them over the Panthers.
No.
Panthers are a stacked team. They've got a lot of legitimate pieces. Maybe the Bruins are a number 2 or 3 team like we kind of suspected all along. And that's still a playoff team, but you do have to be more cognizant of the future if that's kind of where you're at. Anyways, a lot of negativity. Yay, lots of fun. And by the way, I want to go back on a point. I'm not advocating for the Bruins to fire Jim Montgomery. I don't want to see like Evan thinks they should fire Monty right now.
Flip it, baby. Let's clip it.
Flip it. Edit the audio into that. I'm just saying you need the effects of a firing of someone. You need a fire lit under the butts of everybody. That's what you need. Anyways, Connor, what can the people look forward to from you over at the Boston Globe, boston.com?
Yeah, we're going to have you covered every step of the way this season, whether it's game recaps, features, breakdowns. We're going to continue to do more stuff leading up to the deadline. We have something coming out on Wednesday looking at trade assets that the Bruins have. We'll be looking at potential defenseman targets, forward targets, all that stuff in the days leading up to March 8th. So you can find all that stuff over at boston.com and the Globe. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, you can at Conor Ryan _93.
Go do all that. That's Poke the Bear, powered by Prize Picks. I'm Evan Marinofsky. It's Conor Ryan. You Poke the Bear listeners. Have a great rest of your week.